Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to our strategic conversation with Gunnar Wiegand. He is the Managing Director for Asia Pacific at the European External Action Service. Thank you very much, Gunnar, for joining us for this strategic conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Islam. I'm Director for Europe and Geopolitics at Friends of Europe. I'm working from home. We're all teleworking, and Gunnar is also working from home. He's also in Brussels, but we are social distancing, physical distancing, so we're not exactly in the same area or the same room. Isn't it wonderful that through technology, we can actually, despite the lockdowns, partial or complete, we can come together, and we can come together to talk about our shared challenges, our common concerns, and that's what these strategic conversations are all about. Now, I know that many of you are joining us from the four corners of this globe, and we're really, really grateful for you that you are here with us. Now, Gunnar Wiegand is, as I said, Managing Director for Asia Pacific at the European External Action Service. Gunnar and I have known each other for many, many years. We got to meet each other when Gunnar was the spokesman for the one and only Chris Patten, when he was the European Commissioner for External Affairs here in Brussels. Since then, Gunnar has done many, many important jobs, and he's been in charge overseeing the European Union's relationship with Asia for the last 4 years. You're in your 5th year now. You started, Gunnar, in 2016. And it's not to flatter you or anything, but seriously, Europe-Asia relations that I've been following for decades. I used to work with the Far Eastern Economic Review as their Brussels correspondent, now with Friends of Europe. And that relationship has really taken off. In the last 4 years, you have overseen an expansion, a deepening, and a widening of this relationship, Gunnar. And, you know, it used to be just about trade and business, but now we're talking security, we're talking climate change, and increasingly we're talking also about connectivity. So many, many issues to discuss with you, Gunnar. But I'm going to start off with a question, actually 2 questions that have come in from Debating Europe, which is our online chat with citizens. That's our platform at Friends of Europe. It's called Debating Europe. And the questions are rather personal. They talk about you and other diplomats like you. How are you adjusting, adapting to a digital world? What does it feel like to be a digital diplomat? Gunnar.
Well, let me say, first of all, thank you very much for having me in this conversation. And secondly, it's not that the digital world is completely unknown to us. It's not just the very well-known top policy issues such as cybersecurity or 5G following 4G. It is also that we as diplomats are using these many possibilities to keep our contact. I'm responsible for a large region with 41 countries where we have 27 delegations. So if I wouldn't be able to use the possibilities of communication, also secure communication with colleagues abroad, and I have to add, for years also we are negotiating already via video conferencing with colleagues from China or India and other partners. So that is a daily life, but that it has become truly daily life, and that we also need to use these possibilities via home computers at our home offices to stay even in contact with our own colleagues from our own office. That is different. So it is not really the distance we are bridging which is different, it is the closeness where we are bridging which is different.
But also, Gunnar, your job has always been about consultation, exchange of ideas, traveling to Tokyo, Beijing, Delhi, Singapore, Jakarta, going and talking to your counterparts as part of the Asia-Europe meetings, ASEM, but also in your bilateral relationships. How are you managing to do that?
It is that has definitely become more difficult. I must say, the good thing is when you are 4 years in your job and you have many colleagues and friends in different ministries of foreign affairs in this vast and dynamic region, counting half of the world's population, that you can build on a network. So it's not only the network of my colleagues, our ambassadors, and of course the ambassadors of our member states who have their networks. It is also the personal relationship with people who have to care about the links with Europe on the other side. And it is a resilient network. We just yesterday, for example, have had a very good conversation with the host of the next Asia-Europe Summit meeting, which is planned to take place in Phnom Penh, Cambodia in November. We talked with the Cambodians together with the coordinators for the Asian side, Singapore and Russia, and on our side together with the Croat presidency. But we're also preparing in contact with the counterparts in Japan and Korea and China and in India, our next bilateral summits. Often, of course, the colleagues from these countries who are accredited here to the EU and to Belgium are key interlocutors to make it possible also, despite the important time difference we have.
That's right. So I just forgot to tell everyone that you can join this conversation, ask questions by Twitter, through Twitter, #FOE debate. So please do drop in and ask a question, make a quick comment. We will answer if we have the time. So Gunnar, just to go back a little bit. So you talked about the ASEM meeting in Cambodia at the end of this year, big ASEM Asia-Europe meetings, 53, 54 countries coming together. We don't know yet if you will be able to do it in real life, real time, or whether it will be digital. Of course, we don't know that. But this is a very important issue for us because we are now in lockdown, but we're looking at exit strategies all over the world. And what we're seeing is the importance of international collaboration for the recovery, because there has to be a recovery. Many of our economies in Asia, especially the poorer countries in Asia, their economies are devastated. Millions of unemployed, trade has come to a halt, tourism has come to a halt. And that brings me to the question of how Asia and Europe can work together. Now, just one reminder showing how long I've been following these discussions. In 2008, when there was the financial crisis, largely in the West, but worldwide, there was a meeting of the ASEM in Beijing, actually, in 2008. And there, Asia and Europe came together and launched an initiative, which was basically we sink together or we swim together. And I was wondering if this time as well, that kind of collaboration, cooperation can actually manifest itself.
Yes. In fact, I attended an ASEM summit a couple of years earlier, in the early 2000s in Seoul with Commissioner Patton, where you may also have been. Yeah. But you are right, this 2008 ASEM summit, where I was not, was in the midst of the financial crisis and was already determined in a way by the will of the leaders to make a common contribution to the way how to get out of the great difficulties. And many people say nowadays that the difficulties which we are going to face, which have started to show, will be much more profound than what we had experienced in the context of the 2008 financial crisis. Let me first say, however, that we had to focus in the first instance in terms of EU solidarity, on solidarity with our own citizens. So all our ministries of foreign affairs, as well as the European Service of Foreign Affairs, were focusing on the repatriation of our citizens. We had about 600,000 European citizens abroad, which had to be brought back at a time when more and more commercial airlines stopped operating, when more and more airports were closing, and when even intrastate borders between regions or provinces or states were also closing. So that was a huge effort where we have made our contribution by helping to coordinate the various responses by our member states and also by financing flights coming back. And we brought some 500,000 citizens over the last 3 weeks back to Europe. And we have kept, with the help of countries such as Thailand, as Singapore, as also in India and Hong Kong played an important role to bring back people from quite a number of places where tens of thousands of Europeans were stuck from New Zealand to Pakistan. And I want to thank all the authorities and the commercial airlines who have helped in making this possible. The second stage of the response has been done 2 weeks ago, the so-called global response package by the European Union as Team Europe, meaning we have brought together the European Union centrally here in Brussels with the means which the European Commission has, together with the European Investment Bank from Luxembourg, together with the European member states at the Development Council meeting, and also the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD, from London. And the total mobilization of funds which will be reallocated or redirected in 2020 in order to finance, to give fiscal space for short-term responses needed in the health sector, or needed also to mitigate the socio-economic impact of the crisis, in particular also with social protection steps when workers are laid off. That is now in the has started to go into the implementation phase. So we are trying to look in detail with countries what it actually means, this redirection of unallocated funds under the existing financial envelope we have this year. So I want to say clearly it's not fresh funds, but it is redirecting funds for the purposes which are now imposed by the crisis, and it is also advancing payments which we would make in later years to do it already this year.
So who gets the benefits from this rescue package that you've drawn up as Team Europe?
Well, for example, Afghanistan gets something like 120 million euros in this context, and also there is a significant funding of fresh money which will be made available notably for the needs of refugees who are returning from neighboring countries. We have many countries from the Pacific to South Asia, and this is of course not for Japan or Korea. It's also not for China. It is for vulnerable countries. It's for developing countries who have issues to deal with which go beyond the means which are available. The third area then will be, and this is perhaps the one which is at this stage least defined, but all the leaders are recognizing that if we enter into a recession in Europe, and we have the growth predictions which are negative in the United States, if we enter into significantly slowed down growth for many of the emerging economies and other developing countries, and you pointed at some countries which will particularly be suffering with the decline of raw material prices, for example, or with the fact that when industrialized countries have a significantly slowed down demand, the export opportunities.
Exactly,
or
trade.
with the remittances which do not come anymore, or with tourism, which is not there anymore. So, and some of them have a combination of all these factors that we need to look at answers in the financial field.
Yeah.
World Bank, IMF are developing a number of ideas in this context, and certainly debt relief has to be part of it, and the European Union participants in the G20 have been instrumental to make sure that G20 is now rallying behind the concept of debt relief for vulnerable countries. There are still some questions open on middle-income countries in this context, but certainly for the most fragile countries that is established and needs to be then operationalized. And the other questions are then linked to the trade policy to keep markets open and to make sure that our global value chains are not breaking down, but are maintained, and connectivity is indeed improved. Some people now call for the opposite of connectivity and have the instinct of closing down. That would be exactly the wrong answer to a truly global challenge, which requires more international cooperation and not less international cooperation.
So just to come back to international cooperation and collaboration, ASEM is about effective, often leaders have talked about effective multilateralism. And at the moment, multilateralism doesn't seem to have a very good buzz about it. I mean, people are sort of retrenching, as you said, and turning inwards. The WHO is suffering from a lack of funds. You know, the US administration has said it will not continue with the funding. Europe has said it will step in. The WTO is fragilized. And also the United Nations Security Council hasn't been able to meet to discuss the COVID-19 crisis. So I was just wondering, can we as Asians and Europeans come together to try and give this a little new lease of life, multilateralism, effective multilateralism?
I think this is one of the themes where where most Asians and all Europeans are very strongly aligned. And even if we have some partners who are critical of multilateral organizations, and indeed individual questions can be asked on specific organizations, there is no alternative to effective multilateralism. And if it needed a proof, it is this one. A global pandemic, which cannot be fought in one city, in one region, in one country, which requires cross-border cooperation. And there was a lot of debate among the Europeans about this. Yeah, I think the debate is now truly global. Whether it is on the health front, whether it is on the social front, whether it is on the economic, whether it is on the financial front. It even had an impact on conflicts, that the humanitarian ceasefire idea has been now put forward by the Secretary General of the United Nations, supported by many nations, certainly supported by the EU, and we are trying actively to promote it, notably in Afghanistan with the government and the Taliban, but also in Myanmar. We need to make sure that conflicts would stop and would halt, to fight what is the most important, to keep people alive. And perhaps there are also then new political dynamism for peace, allowing recovery to enter into conflict areas. I hope the same will be in the case in Middle Eastern cases.
Absolutely, yeah. So, you know, one of the things that where some questions are coming in, two questions that I'd like you to discuss. One is about how you're going to keep the bilateral summits. You mentioned it in the beginning, but at least 2 summits have now been cancelled because of COVID-19, the one with India and the one with China. So are you planning any of these sort of virtual summits now with, say, partners in ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, China, India, Japan, South Korea, all major players in combating COVID-19? What are your plans for that?
As you know, Shada, I hate to correct you, but you said that these summits were cancelled. We didn't cancel them; we only postponed them.
Postponed them, yeah.
And
my bad.
that was in March, indeed, when the situation became very critical, also in Europe. It is still critical here, but we are now preparing for the deconfinement, and we certainly are preparing for the fight against the economic downturn and the work for recovery. We do have a common responsibility for global economic recovery between Asians and Europeans. These are 2 core powerhouses of the global economy. Asia was hit first, Europe was hit second by this virus. It has a major disruptive effect. The growth in China will be very, very limited this year. And we do certainly need to have a good focused talk between our leaders on the key steps, which are not just national or regional steps, but which are steps of global impact. And I am fairly optimistic that we will be able to have soon summit level meetings, which at this stage cannot be confirmed in detail, but I would predict that summit level meetings with our partners in East Asia, whether it is Japan or Korea, or China, with India. These are four strategic partners of the European Union in Asia. Will go ahead in the next few months.
So 2 questions, and then I'll give you some.
And don't ask me whether they will be in video conference format or in real format, but they will go ahead one way or another.
Okay, so yeah, okay, that's reassuring, and I think the person who's asked the question will be reassured as well. This is someone coming in from Asia. 2 final questions for you. One is, there's a lot of attention being paid to the US and China and their leadership or lack of leadership at the moment. Where does Europe stand? That's one of the questions that's coming in as well. Where does Europe stand in this kind of duo? Can't we talk about a trio? Where is Europe today in terms of, its global outreach?
Duos, trios, this is all in the head of people. It is obvious that a place like European Union, which has only a minor territorial part of the world's inhabited lands, which has only 7% of its population, but which has more than 22% of its world trade, and which provides more than half of the world's development aid, which is a major investor, and which has an open market, which is a key source of income for many partners of the world, is a key player. Which gives us the continued attention of both the United States and of China, not to name some other partners who are closer to Europe in some instances. So we are, of course, not interested in a major conflict, in a dispute between the United States and China. We are having a very close cooperation with our strongest economic partner and significant political partner, United States, including discussing China. We are having discussions with China on how we can address many of the issues which do separate us, and there the analysis very often coincides with analysis made in the United States, but the European way is a different way of dealing with it. We are certainly wanting to keep very good and close relations with the 2 most important economic partners we do have, and these are the United States and China. And we want to work both with them on the improvement of international rules and on the functioning of international organizations, because it is in the interest of everybody that our global markets are not disrupted, and that our international organizations, such as the WHO, such as the WTO, which you referred to, do properly function, because everything else is a lose-lose situation.
So one question that's come in from Ian Bond from the Center for European Reform, he said that the EU last year said that China was a systemic rival, also, of course, a strategic partner. And now that China's narrative is that its system has dealt with COVID-19 better than Europe. How does the EU counter that narrative? How does that EU counter that narrative?
Well, I will not enter into that polemic, which is very active in media, and in particular in social media, who was dealing best with which situation. We are in the midst of that pandemic challenge. We have shown our solidarity with China when we saw the devastating impact in Wuhan and the Hubei province, with almost 60 tons of protective material, face masks and other things, that China paid back the solidarity with its own solidarity in very visible ways, and in many countries in Europe, but also in many other countries of the world. And it had the then also medical expertise in dealing with it. Now, I think there are the more the pandemic goes around, the more experts are being created. And there are differences in treatment, and we see differences even between different countries of the European Union. We see differences in different parts of the United States. So I think this is frankly not a system question. When we observe the discipline with which many citizens in democratic open societies observe the rules which have been established by their governments, because people share the analysis, accept the prescription to reduce the spread risk, I think it is not about the one or the other system. Having said this, certainly there are questions asked, and President Macron made very recently again reference to these questions, and these will have to be asked, but the core is now fight the pandemic in the health sector and move towards the effective ways of achieving a global economic recovery out of the quite devastating socioeconomic impact which is going to happen now and which in many countries already has started to happen.
Thank you very much indeed, Gunnar. We are, as you say, in the midst of a COVID-19 emergency, and pandemics, will be coming back. That is at least the view of many medical experts, saying, this is not the last time that in an interconnected, interdependent world, we will have to face a global health challenge of this kind. So we have to be prepared. And I think, as you said, health issues will be very important in the Asia-Europe discussions. But you also said very clearly, and I think this is absolutely right, that we now have to work together. In this, it has to be all hands on deck. And all of us, all our economies, all our people will have to work together to make sure that the rescue, the recovery is strong, fast, and sustainable. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. On issues to do with China-Europe relations, we will be talking on Friday, actually, at 11:30 with the Ambassador of China, His Excellency Jiang Ming. We'll be talking to him about Europe-China relations, and I'm sure many of the questions that we asked today will be asked of him as well. So really happy that you were here to talk to us about that. And the week after, we'll be talking to Cristina Galash, Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs from Madrid, talking about how Spain is really pushing the multilateral issue very, very strongly, both within Europe and also on the global stage. So Gunnar, thank you so much also for reassuring us that the Asia-Europe conversation continues to deepen and expand, and that questions that are so relevant to the people of both continents, so both regions, are very high up on the European Union's agenda and also in Asia. So good luck. As you know, we'll be following you. I'll be watching very closely to see how this relationship evolves. It's reassuring to see that everything is actually on track despite the digital world we're now forced to live in. And the digital world is actually helping us also to connect, as we've just done today. So thank you to you, Gunnar, and thank you everyone for watching us and taking part in this conversation. Stay safe and stay well.